I'll have 3 slides that will walk through different recommendations on helping you to build context. So the first point is leveraging different data sources. You have a lot of data. I think every client I work with has scan data, loyalty data, panel data. There's not a shortage of data out there. It's really how you manage the data and how you get the max benefit of working with the data to ultimately build the right recommendations and stories with retailers. The 3 ways that we talk about leveraging different data sources is, these are tips and tricks, but the first one is to really try to simplify it as much as you can. At Shopper Intelligence, we track 150 different measures, but realistically, it's an 80-20 rule where 80% of the value comes from 20% of the things that we do. We have clients that have been working with us for many years, and we always try to simplify it right off the bat, because if you try to boil the ocean, it's not going to work. You want to focus in on the 2 or 3 things that maybe a data provider or a resource or a data set is most impactful on, and then focus on that initially. When you're linking data, you can't link everything, so you try to find those 2 or 3 things maybe. I've done this many times with scan data and panel data and loyalty data, where if you keep it simple and focus on the task at hand and don't try to look at everything, try to focus in on those key things, it'll make it a lot easier to link them together. The middle point is aligning your data. This is a frustrating thing that I deal with all the time, where we might have an insights team that defines a category one way or has slightly different segmentation. The field team, the category and commercial team, they look at it slightly different. When the insights team is showing research, it's not exactly apples to apples. We always recommend aligning early, talking to people in your organization, trying to figure out how you can link these data sources together. If you can't have a consistent definition, you can't have a consistent segmentation, it will be very difficult to link these things together. It'll feel like separate conversations and it won't actually link together. Be consistent. Speaking of Scott Matthews, I heard he was mentioned earlier when I was in the back, but Scott and I were talking about this yesterday. Obviously in his business, he's talking about training people. In our business of data, we found that a lot of companies, when they buy a data set, whether it's ours or somebody else's, it takes a little bit of time to build that expertise. If you're only buying something once and then the next year you're not developing your team and they're not becoming experts. What we always say is, try to be consistent when you're linking things together. Don't buy it one year and not the other, and try to build processes and try to automate and standardize it. There's a lot that's being thrown onto the teams, and if we can make it simple for them, it will benefit the field greatly. The next part is try to zoom out when needed. When I'm talking to a buyer, if we're just talking about, let's say, an add-delete list, and there's a product that maybe is down 20% year over year, you probably don't have to zoom out very far. You know what you need to do. It's not something that requires too much information. You know what you need to know, and you can move forward. Other times when you're talking to retailers, especially if you're in JBP's long-range planning, top to tops, you have to think of it from their point of view, especially from the leadership. How are they viewing the overall business? If you're going to something very impactful that might disrupt some different things, it will make it much more difficult. Focus on benchmarking. With benchmarking, every data provider has different benchmarking that they have, and that's the best way to show somebody how something compares to something else. I always say focus on the benchmarking. Try to benchmark, if you can benchmark it competition, other categories. It helps build a better context when you're talking to retailers. The last point is around collaboration. I touched on this a little bit. When we're talking about how can we build better context, there's a lot of resources, a lot of people that can help you drive that context and build that overall message with the retailer. The best one is the retailers. I've partnered with retailers. They've given me their loyalty data, their profitability, their shrink, all the different measures that were important to them. We were able to plan out much better in terms of understanding what was important to them and then us building out the recommendation based off of what was most important to them. Giving them the right context to make the right decisions, that ultimately, if you can give that to them, they will much more likely to follow your recommendations. Break down internal silos. This is something I've experienced and I've seen many times where I mentioned it a little bit earlier about aligning on segmentation and definition. There's times where you might have one department has a data source, they might have something and another department doesn't know about it, but they could use it. Sometimes there's bureaucracy, there's red tape, people aren't talking to people. What we found is the truly best in class, they have a very collaborative partnership between the field and the headquarter team. They're talking about tools, they're talking about processes, they're talking about how they can use it, and it becomes very powerful because you get everybody in the room and they can talk about what they can deliver and how it can benefit the overall messaging. But it has to be an activation plan that is planned from the center. This last point, which is near and dear to my heart, is better planning with data providers. When I was at Hormel and Colgate, we did a lot of long-range planning, top to tops, and it was some of the best conversations that I had with retailers. You can talk about some of their bigger initiatives, you can throw some crazy ideas out there, and you could start to challenge the team to do different things to disrupt the categories. That same logic applies with data providers. There's many companies that it's very transactional. It's not a partnership. We have a client that is probably best in class in this, where I actually go through a formalized JBP process every quarter with one of my clients, where they sit down, we talk about what's happened, what's going to happen, we lay out 2-3-year goals on new product development. This is something that when you're talking to companies like mine, having that partnership, you'll find that at companies like mine, we are very much client-led innovation. When we are building new tools, new measures, new capabilities, we have some ideas, but the best ideas really come from our clients. I would always challenge everybody to try to be more deliberate with your relationships with your data providers, because if you partner with them, if you talk with them, if you plan with them, you'd be amazed on what they have, because they might even be able to share some things for a special project. Hey, I'd love to see the rest of the aisle, the rest of the store. You might not know where that data is, but if you're partnering with your data providers, they do have that data, and it might be able to come in at the right time.